mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining us today in studio is Cason Short, the owner and operator of Bill Byers Hunter Club. Cason, welcome to the DU podcast. And the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and let you introduce yourself to our audience, who you are, what your background is, and then we can get into some general conversations about the property and you and some of the cool things that you guys are doing over there.
Cason Short here, and I grew up around a commercial duck hunting operation. My grandfather founded it in the 50s. So as far back as I can remember, I've been around duck hunting. A lot of people have that story of their first hunt or their first memory, and I don't really remember life when I wasn't around duck hunting. So I've been around it forever. Actually went to Mississippi State, studied construction management. I was going to do something different than what I'm doing now, but finished school and went right back to it and doing what I love.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's kind of, the whole reason why I came up with this podcast is the story behind, your family's property there and when your grandfather started that. I came out and hunted with you last year. It was my first time being over there. It was awesome. Lodge, property, it was so cool. But kind of share with our audience, like, the commercial duck operation that your grandfather started is so unique, especially for Arkansas way back in the day. But the story before he gets into that, I thought it was cool. You have like all the chainsaws on the wall in your lodge. I mean, these old chainsaws. So kind of what is that kind of signifying, these cool chainsaws?
You remember, I can't remember the year. Mike would be able to tell us probably for sure, but I think like 1962, we went to a 2-duck 20-day season. It was early 60s, which, in Green Timber, Arkansas is basically one duck. So it really kind of put a halt to the commercial operation of duck hunting. And I think my grandfather always had plans of farming, but that really catapulted the effort to clear everything and get into ag production. And that kind of drove that towards that. Now, I grew up, again, around those old chainsaws, and my father and grandfather working with them. They both passed away in less than a year time span of each other. So kind of in their absence, picked up some stuff and started kind of going through their belongings and then started collecting. So I have a little chainsaw collection there that we've decorated the house with. But that's interesting that you mentioned that. That's like our number one asked question when someone comes to the lodge. Like, what's the deal with the chainsaws? So much so that one of our logos is a chainsaw. Yeah. And our head guide's like, man, people are going to think we're loggers. I'm like, no. If you've been there,
you were at one point in time.
Yeah,
technically,
that's right. Yep.
So it is like I'm not surprised that people ask about it because that's one of the first things I remember when I think about that place. And it's really cool the way the lodge is set up. The original kind of house lodge is built into or around kind of the new place.
That's right. Yep. So the original building, it's been added onto more times than I can count. Every time we open up a wall, we found where it's been tied into or a window's been framed over. It's crazy. And it's been moved. So it used to sit down there on the highway now. It's moved up to where it is now. It's the original portion of a small building there. And believe it or not, it used to run 100 people a day through that building, charge $10 a head to go hunt in 1955.
Wow. And that's what's the cool aspect of it because, I mean, it was a commercial operation, but it wasn't something that it was an elitist deal. That's what I thought it was. So it was like one of the first just blue collar dudes walked up, gave their money, and went out and were able to hunt that day. It was a daily. It wasn't a draw. It wasn't. People just showed up. That's so cool. I mean, what made him decide to do that?
So I think my family settled, when they moved to Arkansas, they settled in Lodge's Corner, which, as my grandfather grew up, most of that land had been bought up, and it was a little bit older community, older money there. So he had to move away to be able to find something he could afford and get his hands on. So he landed there in Hunter. So I think he knew that he wanted to have a place of his own, a place for him and his friends. It was kind of his goal. But as he told me, some of that stuff he just paid the back taxes on to buy the land, but he never thought he could pay for it all. So the commercial aspect of it kind of paid for that, subsidized the land, but it was always really more about friendship and relationships than just massive scale, commercial operation.
Yeah. And he's farming that the whole time too, right?
Well, it was all, so when he first bought it, it was all timber.
All timber, that's
Yep,
right. And
all
so
of it.
then he kind of transitioned into that,
Right.
Still having hunters show up, but also farming at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of them over the time, when they'd show up as a guest or a paying client, and then over the years would evolve into guiding for him, as people, it's kind of a young man's game, as we all know.
Yeah.
So as people would get older and stop, he had someone that had been hunting there for years that knew how to do it, and they would step up and start guiding. And
That's cool. So you pay $10, you get a guided hunt out of it. You walk out into the timber.
right.
Somebody's calling for you. I mean, that's pretty cool. In the 50s.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's a very unique story. And I guess it's so unique in the sense for me, because looking at it, these large scale operations now are so much, it's very, very different in how, different outfitters throughout the country. And you look at that, and like I said, it literally was like guy off the street walks in, and it was just opportunity, really kind of opened the door for opportunities, possibly even for people who didn't get the chance to go to some other big club or whatever.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And so we struggle with that a little bit. You go look at some of these new places, they have this massive $1 million lodges, and they're amazing, and at times maybe covetous of that. But I wouldn't want to give up the history and everything that we have in ours, our miniature museum, if you will, and just how long we've been there and all the stuff that's happened inside of that building. I think that's really unique to us, and there's a lot of value for us in that.
And you guys are doing some just cool other things on the property. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about, you're really, really hands-on involved with some of the collar, some of the telemetry studies that they're doing. And if anyone follows you on Instagram, what's your Instagram handle again?
Bill Byers Hunter Club.
Bill Byers Hunter Club. And it pops up as Cason short.
Yeah.
Okay. Just so that everyone knows what they're getting into there.
Right.
Really cool info. You post a lot of good pics. We'll get into that here in a little bit. But just the idea that you are so hands-on in conservation and like helping science and research, kind of explain how you got into that.
That goes back a long way too. My grandfather really instilled upon me that it's a resource. And if it's not, if we don't take care of it, it's not going to be there for the next generation. So I grew up with people that had that mindset. So it just started that way. His house was a few miles away from our farm. So he had a 40-acre fenced-in area that he raised deer. He also raised Canada geese long before resident Canada geese were a thing. But he noticed one day that white fronts started coming in and landing when he would go out and feed his geese every morning. Circa 1991, he's got 15 to 20,000 white fronts in his backyard every day. And people would stop off the highway. It was Highway 49 there, just north of Brinkley. So people were constantly in and out watching this really neat show of these birds. And we ran into a grad student one day who had spent, I don't know, he was there like 3 or 4 hours. Finally, like, man, what are you doing? Like, why have you been here this long?
You're creepy.
Yeah, right. And so he was reading the alphanumeric codes off these neck bands, and we're sending them in. I was like, well, okay, well, we can do that. We spent some time here watching them. So I'm 10, 11 years old and started doing that. And we did it over a number of years, sometimes reading over 100 different neck bands in a year. Got to know the head biologist for the Canadian Wildlife Service that was involved in that study. We're submitting information that way through them. They gave us a whole bunch of information back, maps, and just for a 10-year-old kid, like, it was really cool to see where these birds are coming from. Yeah. So my nerdism goes back a long way. So that's where I started with white fronts. I've always really been kind of just enamored with them as a species.
Yeah.
Probably because I guess kind of in my lifetime, I've seen their evolution.
Yeah.
In the 90s, 10 or 15,000 was a lot on our farm. Now, this year, we'll hold anywhere from 100 to 150,000 as early season opens. So they've shifted a lot. They've adapted to hunting pressure and habitat changes probably quicker, I think, than any other species that we hunt.
And that's funny you say that, because my co-host, Dr. Mike, and I, we actually have Dr. Javon Bank coming on next week the following week to record a show just about some of the research that he's doing. And I know you're very aware of him and his studies, and you're involved in that. And now it's kind of come such full circle that now you're hosting these science teams out there on your property, are you not?
Yes, yeah. So
that's cool.
That story continues. So we got an opportunity. Paul Link out of Louisiana was studying, kind of why and how they had lost as many birds as they had in Southwest Louisiana. Saw him on Instagram, reached out to him, like, hey, send him some videos. And I think at first when I told him the numbers we had, I don't think he really believed me.
Liar.
Yeah. So I started sending him some videos. I'm like, this is what it looks like in October. And I'm really curious, where do these birds go from here after they leave our property and they scatter out when season goes, when it opens, where are they going and where are they wintering? So he responded. He's like, yeah, let's do it. Luckily, we had a bunch of donors that got on board and paid for the units because that's the biggest barrier to entry. Almost $2,000 per unit for the data plan that goes with them. It's like a cell phone and the
just
actual
strap it on the back of a bird that just flies away.
Right.
You never know.
Yeah.
Coyote might be eating that thing.
And it's amazing how many. We retrieve. I think the first year we retrieved like 3 that never made it more than 5 miles.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are hunters, or is it typically like predation, or what's?
I think a lot of those that are that nearby is avian predation.
Yeah.
I think that, and then you have some birds that don't acclimate to it. Now, I've never seen it, but he says, he told us that there are some birds that just refuse to fly with it. You run in there and catch them, take it off, and they'll fly right off. But
Yeah, I've heard about that. And we had a past episode of the podcast where we had some different scientists and researchers who were talking about the sizing and the variance and how it fits. And like sometimes the birds get weird with it.
Right.
But we'll definitely be talking to Dr. Von Bank about that here in a week or so. So it's just cool how you went full circle to a 10-year-old reading some research paper probably to now hosting, these science teams.
It was really cool to be a part of that, to get to do something like that. And we did some mallard stuff too. Yeah, it's coming full circle. I think it's really cool. And then you get to watch where they go. And you really see, when you do that, you really see what kind of part you're playing on the whole landscape, not just right there in your back door, but where those birds go, where they winter, and where. We've had some that will return the second year. They'll come to Arkansas in October, and then they'll bounce back to Indiana and get shot in Indiana. So you never think about the habitat work that you're doing at your own place impacting someone several hundred miles away. But
easy now. Don't be talking about those white fronts in Indiana. The guys I grew up hunting with are trying to keep that a secret right now. Well, it's not a very good secret.
So it's alarming to me, because we look at where Arkansas was, even in the 70s and 80s, when people didn't know where a white front was. Yeah. Now you're seeing those numbers north of us, and what's going to happen in 20 years?
As fast as, like you kind of mentioned, as fast as these birds are changing some of their behaviors, wintering behaviors anyway, what's going to happen in 5?
Right.
That's the interesting thing, and that's cool that you're on the ground level of being able to be a part of that. But explain to our audience how you guys were catching those white fronts, because I know you have a couple books in some photos that you've taken a lot of images of.
Yeah.
But explain how those birds are caught.
So we catch them with a rocket net. I've got some good videos I can show you after this, but not something I can put on social media, and for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
It's really neat to watch. But if you're against that kind of thing, then you could raise some noise and be upset about it. But it's pretty amazing. I guess classified as dynamite, so you have to have a permit to even carry the charges. Yep. It's loud. You can hear it all the way across the farm, and we're staged up, with 15 people ready to go running in. You can hear it when it goes off. It's pretty cool.
And just to clarify that, this is not something that you are doing. This is something that permitted.
Right.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is involved. This is something that these scientists have permits to do. Yep. And you're gracious enough to open your doors to let them do it on your property. I just want to clarify that, because I don't want people to think you're out there with a rocket net bagging white fronts. It's like, okay, we just wanted to make sure that our audience knows what we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, they won't even let me push the button. I've asked repeatedly.
But, I bet. Yeah. That'd be the first thing I would ask.
Right. Yep.
So, no, that's really cool. And we kind of alluded to it a little bit, and it's definitely evident on your social media. You spend a lot of time with the camera in your hands. We even purchased some of your images for the magazine. I did the article in March, April, and I think John bought 2 or 3 photos for just my piece, that white front piece. But how did you get into that? And is that just something that goes along with it, or is it like a real passion for you? And
yeah, it's a passion, and I think it dates back to some of the early duck hunting that we had at our farm. So back in the 50s, I don't know if you know the name Henry Reynolds, but he was a sports writer here in Memphis. Became a good friend of my grandfather, hunted there a lot, and either brought a camera with him or brought a staff photographer from the Appeal with him. So we've got stacks of black and white photos. And I guess as a kid, they were just so revered. You just thought that was the neatest thing. And I still do. I love those images. We're so lucky to have them. But I think some of those early images is what kind of started me appreciating a still image and the memory that it could hold for you. So I've always had an interest in photography, and really with social media and marketing and everything else, kind of stepped into it a lot harder in the last few years, but definitely enjoy it. It's a passion of mine.
Awesome. We'll get right back to that. We'll talk about social media here in a minute, but we're just going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back talking with Cason Short. All right, we're back here with Cason Short, the owner and operator of Bill Byers Hunter Club. Cason, before the break, we were kind of getting into, the details of your photography, but then I wanted, you kind of hinted towards social media. And I think that's one thing that really jumps out to me. One, because I'm terrible with, I have to literally like set alarms to be like, hey, you should post on Instagram. It's like, right. I won't even look at it, for weeks on end. I'm like, oh gosh, I should probably post something. But you're really good about kind of, last week you had a post saying, hey, first specs just showed up, and that was September 21st, right around there, 22nd? 23rd. Yeah. Okay. And so like that's early, but that, even in our office, like our photo editor, John Hoffman, pokes his head in my office. He's like, hey, did you see Cason just got the first specs? I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. So it's cool how you're doing that, and you're sharing not only, the resource there, but also along with it, kind of your family traditions and history. Why do you think that social media is so important for you and just for you to share your story?
Well, I think it's important because it's a platform to reach a lot of people quickly. And think about how much information we have at our fingertips now. And YouTube's a great example of social media. Man, when's the last time that you were working on something and you're like, I don't know how to do this? Pull it up on YouTube and watch a video and you're ready to go. So I think it's similar. It's shorter format, obviously, and not video. Well, they're kind of pushing reels pretty hard now. But but I think social media is a really great way to inform other people or pay attention to things that you like, especially in the photography world. Follow guys that post great images and stuff that you want to see and you enjoy seeing. And
who are some people that you follow photography wise that you kind of emulate or just kind of see their stuff and like, oh dude, that's awesome?
Oh man, so Blake Fisher is a friend of mine, but a great photographer. There's a bunch of others. Phil, is it Conkey? Is that
yeah?
Okay. Yeah, you
Banded,
guys, I use a lot of his stuff.
Just say John Hoffman will make John Hoffman feel really good.
I do follow John Hoffman.
Yeah, no, I know. I was just kidding. No, he has some good stuff.
That cover he shot was pretty sweet.
Yeah. He does some good work. I'm just messing with you about Hoffman, but no, I think that's cool, and that's something that people can look at from your side, and then just hearing that. And you post a lot of pictures, even of your kids out there, and so to kind of explain the importance of, we'll make that transition from you've talked about you and the resource and the property, but now you're bringing, which I think is an awesome aspect of the story, now you're bringing your kids into this story. And how fun is that?
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work too. Yeah. So if you're one of those dads out there taking your kids and it's frustrating, it's okay. It's frustrating for all of us. And that's maybe one of the downsides of social media. You're just seeing everyone's highlights.
Oh yeah. They didn't see when everything they dropped in the water and you're wet and you're going home before shooting time.
Right, exactly.
You didn't get to see any of that.
We don't photograph that.
Yeah.
But no, it's a lot of fun. So I've got 3 boys that are 4, 7, and 9, and then I've got a little girl who's 2. Obviously, she's not going with us yet, but the 4-year-old started tagging along last year when he was 3. He went on a teal hunt with us the other day and had a good time. So it's a lot of fun. I don't know. I guess I look at it how I grew up. I don't remember a time when I wasn't going.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Andrew Jones at Yeti. I was sitting in the parking lot before we came in. We were talking. He's going deer hunting with his kids this weekend. His 2 boys, and we were talking about, how involved do you really want your kids to be? Like, are you pushing them to shoot? So, like my 7 and 9-year-old, okay, they shoot skeet, not super proficiently, but they can hit targets in the air. Mm-hmm. They're safe with guns. I still just give them 1 round at a time because I'm not ready for follow-up shots. But some days they go out and they don't shoot. And then I'm like, man, I don't know. It's like, should I be pushing them harder to shoot? Should I be spending more time with them? Like, are they not comfortable? And then I think about it that, wait, they just went duck hunting and they had fun. So do I need to emphasize the kill, or do I emphasize that we went hunting together and we had fun? And I think that's a really important thing. And Andrew agreed with me on that. Like, go have fun. That's what duck hunting is about. You know, if we educate people, if we teach our young that you have to kill to have a good duck hunt, that's not really true. I mean, some of my favorite memories are days when we probably didn't kill that many ducks.
Yeah.
But sorry, that's a little side note on kids. But.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm in the same boat. I've got a 9 and 7-year-old girls, and I know guys who their kids are shooting at 6 and multiple shots, and I'm like, yeah, my girl's not ready to do that.
Yeah.
She's just not there yet. She she has an interest, but then she loses it, and it's like she's just not quite there to grasp it all. She wants to go.
Right.
She told me we have a little duck camp over there in Arkansas. She told me that we need to put in a playground. That was her only recommendation. I was like, yeah, okay.
Right.
That's on the table. Okay. But yeah, so it's different for every kid.
Sure.
And it's cool, but like even not just during hunting season, how important is that property for your family to get your kids out there? I mean, I think that's the cool aspect of it too.
Oh yeah, year round, and we talked about coaching sports earlier, so that's a balance.
Yeah.
I spent a lot more time in the field than I did playing sports, and I think looking back, like the outdoors will always be there. I've probably spent too much time doing that. That's all right. It worked out just fine. But, so that's a balance, trying to do that. But we spend as much time as we can over there. Man, we do all kinds of stuff. We've got a pretty nice little crappie and bass lake there, rifle range set up. So both of those 7 and 9-year-old are shooting 600 yards, ring and steel.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's impressive.
The 4-year-old is shooting a 22 pretty proficiently. Yeah. So, like, we dabble.
Yeah.
We do a lot of stuff.
No, yeah, absolutely. That sounds awesome. No, it's just cool that, just the generational aspect of it. You see so many different operations either fade away or, something changes or family gets in the argument and things change. But it's awesome to see how you've been able to manage to keep the property, in the resource and everything going and really how it's transitioning, honestly, into something that is benefiting North American waterfowl in a sense that now, like I said, you're doing the science and research part of it there. So it's pretty cool to hear. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm really lucky to have grown up in that place, to have experienced it, to be able to share it with friends and my kids. So I don't know. I think that's kind of our job as stewards. Like if we're not leaving it better than we found it, then we need to hold ourselves more accountable.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And one thing I do want to ask you about, you are a proud shooter of the Browning A5 and some of the older ones. And if you walk into your camp, you've got, A5s on the wall. So where did that history start?
I started back in the 50s. You go back and look at our black and whites, and they're everywhere in there. There's a lot of iconic shotguns. We've got some Model 12s in there. That's an interesting kind of side note on the Browning Winchester family. I don't know what year it was, but my grandfather decided that he needed a dependable shotgun for all of his guides. So went out and bought them all Model 12s because that was, at the time, what he felt like was the most dependable thing going. Been around Auto 5s forever. So I kind of came into two different sets of guns. My grandfather's guns, which were, used workhorses. I mean, just did a lot with them. And then my father collected A5s or Auto 5s. He was more into the unfired, like pristine,
in the box type gun.
Really pretty guns, like kind of like y'all's collection out here, so it's interesting. One of my favorites is it's a 1958 Mag 12, which was the first year of the Mag 12. It's my grandfather's gun, and it's kind of cool to go shoot a duck in the woods with that gun that's been there for 60 years.
Yeah.
He's got I've got it. It's I can't remember what year it is, but it is the first year of the Mag 20. So that's kind of a neat little set, cool. Those two.
So do you shoot those on a regular basis?
Yeah, I shoot the Mag 12 a lot.
Yeah.
And then 20 some too, but I don't know. Every time I take a 20 gauge, I miss, and I blame it on the fact that it's a 20 gauge, not me. So it's just a mental hurdle.
Yeah, you'll never get over that unless you start hitting stuff. That's a bad one. But that's cool. That's a cool legacy aspect of it with the Brownings. And one other thing I was going to ask you about, when you go to your camp, one thing that jumps out front, you got these massive trucks where you bring people out to the field. It's the only place I've ever been where you load people in the back of a big truck.
Yeah.
And you guys drive out into the field. When did that start? Is that something that you kind of started, or is that how it's always been?
It's from my childhood to now.
And what are those trucks?
So I'm a big fan of what we call dent side forwards, which was 73 to 79. And I guess, so my dad had a 76, and then the 79 that's mine, we had it forever. I think we bought it in like 87 3, so relatively new when we bought it. But I drove it when I was 16, worked on it, for the entire summer to get it roadworthy, had it forever. So it's just my passion for them just kind of stems from being around them. But that's over there in our country with rice ground the way it is, we have what we call a hard pan. So you've got a few inches of topsoil, and then you get down to hard clay. Yeah. And it's just, you've seen them.
It's like concrete, don't you? Yeah.
They drive right out there. We pull right up to the pit. You step out, you're 3 steps, you're in it. Yeah. And the trucks, after you go the first time and you get your ruts cut, you can go in 2-wheel drive the rest of the year. Yeah. So it's just an effective way of doing it. We've done it forever. We talk about kind of the history and all the things, but one of the sights and sounds of duck season for me is those trucks idling in the parking lot.
I bet.
We crank them in the morning. I'm 7 years old again, standing there.
That's cool. Yeah, another thing that you guys did, and it's the first place I've ever been that did this, and I thought it was awesome. I was like, oh, well, I'm doing this at my place now. Like, no headlamps. Right. You tell everyone, like, you wake up in the morning, going duck hunting. Everyone, first thing you do is you dig out your headlamp, right? Stuff like that. And you guys are just like, absolutely no headlamps. Why do you do that?
So you notice we go out in the trucks, like we don't use headlights. Mm-hmm. And if one of our newer trucks, that white one, we've got tape over the dash. There's tape on the clock. So we try to go out without using, and basically it's a function of not using our headlights. The headlamps and everything else is secondary because it ruins whoever is driving that truck. It ruins their night vision and they can't see. So I don't think headlamps are a big issue, but it definitely headlights and these LED light bars. Man, if you've been over there and seen some of our neighbors, from miles away, you're seeing this light, and it gets up. Every bird that's on the roost between us and them is now in the air. So it's just a way of controlling pressure for us. Mm-hmm. We want to get, if we're going all the way across the farm or if we're going next to the lodge there, we want to disturb as few birds as possible on the way.
And that comes from the kind of your philosophy is that pressure, especially in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. Pressure anywhere, but especially in that area where you're in Arkansas. Like you said, you can look out and see headlamps, from miles away.
Right.
Is that something, that you guys have always just is that something you adopted from your father and grandfather, or is that something that, you're like, hey, we gotta keep the pressure as minimal?
No, we've done it for as long as I can remember. So 40 years now that we've done that. And that's hard, it's kind of hard to imagine that the pressure would have been that high 40 years ago, but it's just what we've always done. Our farm, I'd be scared to count the miles of roads that we have there. But during duck season, we used kind of 2 roads in and out, as few as possible. Our rest pond's 230 acres, and we dry pied on one end. We traverse less than 1/8 a mile on one edge of it. So we stay away from that as much as possible. And that's the one controllable that we have. We can't control the weather. We can't control the rain, cold fronts. We can't control the bee pop or any of that stuff, but we can control pressure. Yeah. So that's the biggest tool in our toolbox.
And this is an interesting question. I asked someone else. I can't remember who it was. You mentioned bee pop. At your age, you've probably never hunted in a restricted season. So how important is the bee pop numbers for you? Like when this came out, when we just, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service released it, we kind of did some things with the chart. We posted it up. Like, how important is that information for you? Are you like kind of gearing up, waiting to see that? Or is that something that it's not really, you're aware of it, but it's not really kind of front of mind?
I pay pretty close attention to it, especially not having had it for 2 years. Like it was really, where are we? Where's that benchmark? But I think it's important. And I think I don't know. It depends on who you talk to. I hear a lot of varying opinions on it, but I've got some concerns about where we are numbers wise and where we may be going.
Yeah, no, and I don't. We don't necessarily need to break it down. We got Mike Brazier to do that. He'll break it down.
I'm not the guy for
He'll
that.
do it for 6 different episodes. He's already done it. But it's just always interesting to me. Like I have buddies in Indiana, and I'm like, hey, did you see the numbers? I'm like, nah, I didn't even look. You know what I mean? Guys I hunt with in Arkansas, they're like, no. Yeah. Like it's just not something. But they're all either my age or younger too. Right. Where that's never really played a role in their season. It's, it could potentially. Yeah. But it's like, they're just not into it. So it's I always like to ask people, because we put so much emphasis on it. Mm-hmm. It's always interesting to just get another opinion on that. So. Yeah.
So some of that, I guess my interest in it could be, or maybe some of my reservations about where we're at could be that I remember the point system. Mm-hmm. I remember lead shot. I remember when we had hot counties. So like our farm's in 2 different counties. Depending on where you hunted, one day you could use lead shot, the next morning you couldn't. Yeah. So I remember those kind of the Wild West, that we had of season dates and the way we changed things. Yeah. And now we've bumped along here, 24 years?
I think more than that.
Maybe more than that now.
Yeah.
A long time.
Yeah.
And so like my internal clock is going, we need to change something just to change it, you know, because it changed. Seemed like annually we were changing things back then.
Yeah,
so.
And that makes sense. I said you probably weren't old enough, but you probably were hunting a lot younger than I did. So you probably had about 7, 8, 10-year jump on me.
But it was at least around it to remember it, you know, whether I was carrying a gun or not. But yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that's cool. You know, is there anything else that you kind of, you know, would like to share, you know, about Bill Byers Hunter Club with our audience that, you know, whether it's from the science and research aspect, from, hey, check us out on Instagram because it's just cool stuff, whatever. I mean, anything that pops in your mind?
I love interacting with people on Instagram. So, you know, if you like what we're doing, if you're interested more, you know, shoot us a message, comment, you know, that's a great way. Social media is a great platform to talk to people and stuff like that. And I struggle a lot with what should I be posting, you know, like what, and that's don't want to get into the downsides of social media, but in a lot of ways, there's some stuff out there that maybe doesn't paint duck hunting in the best light, or maybe puts emphasis on the wrong parts of duck hunting, I guess. So, I mean, if we'd love to hear from people and find out, you know, what they want to see and see more of, because we do stuff that's boring to me in the summertime, and I'll post something about it, and people are like, "Oh, that's awesome!" Like, I mean, I can show more of that. Like that doesn't even
any of the farming / habitat / you know, even just putting water on fields. Yeah, you know that. And to be honest, like I'm the same way with that with like cornfields,
right?
Where I'm just like whatever. Like I grew up around cornfields as far as you could go. But I came down here and it's like, oh, rice. Like, what? Why are they putting water? Like, how are they moving the water off? You know what? And so, like, even for me, you know, even I've lived here for 15 years, but it's still pretty cool. So I can see where people's interest, if you're in a completely different region, or even if you're in Arkansas and not necessarily farming every day, there's definitely an interest in that habitat stuff for sure.
Yeah, and it's just stuff you take for granted. Like another good example is eagles. You know, we'll have 20 plus on the farm all year when the migration gets here. We've got 2 that live there year round. We hunted right there next to them. Oh yeah. Totally take that for granted. And then we'll go out there in the spring. The kids will bring, you know, one of their friends over and they're like, oh my gosh, there's an eagle. I'm like, oh yeah, you want to go see the nest? Like, I mean, you just forget it. I forget about stuff like that a lot.
How cool it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome.
Lucky to have stuff like that.
Absolutely. Well, Cason, this has been great. I appreciate you coming in and joining us. Anytime, once we start ramping up some more of this science and research stuff, especially once we, you know, maybe we could get you in here with some of the people that you're doing the research with, that'd be a cool conversation. But I do appreciate you joining us and hope we can get you back on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Come back anytime.
I'd like to thank my guest, Cason Short, the owner of Bill Byers Hunter Club, for joining us today and just talking about not only the property, but the resource, the kids, Instagram, everything all across the board. It was a great conversation. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for doing a great job of putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.